everybody, and welcome to Thought Raid, a show where we take on thoughts and find better ways of thinking about them. I'm Brandon Brown, owner of United Gamers Nations and a lay counselor, and with me today, of course, is the wonderful Tim DeNock of Break the Meta. And today is an exciting day. Today is Saturday, where we're going to have a special guest that's with us, but before we jump into that, I want to kind of just explain what today's topic is going to be about. So one of the things that has been specifically on our mind to kind of go over, because there's been, a lot of people that I've known that have specifically struggled in these areas. There's been a lot of people that have struggled with self-esteem issues, self-hatred. A lot of people that have been struggling with just a lot of those areas of being overly labeled and like, you're always this, you're never that, you're, whatever, and then they just slap a label on the entirety of you or that person, and then that person then just accepts that, and that becomes a part of their identity. And since that happens so much, this is something that I've been wanting to talk about. As with like a little quick of a background, there was things that were put onto my life growing up, but in general, I feel like because of the strong presence that I had with my parents and being an only child, a lot of those labels didn't hit me because I grew up kind of like a young adult. So like people would throw them at me and I would think about them, but if my parents wasn't saying something about it and the adults in my life weren't saying anything about it, and they're typically not as bothered, it didn't always hit me. But God brought so many people my way that it did hit them, and God gave me eyes to kind of see through the labels, to see their heart and who they're meant to be. So one of the things I want to go through before we just jump in and we welcome our special guest is I want to kind of make sure that the definition of label, or like when you've been labeled, is well defined, because that will be very important moving forward, so that we're just on the same page. So I want to pick your brain on this one, Tim, because you're really good when it comes to bringing these things out, and you've got a lot of good things that are written down for today in general. So what would you say specifically is your version of a label?
Well, I didn't look this up or anything. It's just what came to me. I think it's a perspective that may be either accurate based on past behaviors or inaccurate based on a person's assumption of our motive. And it's, just thinking about my own labels. Like in high school, I didn't date much. I mean, I did date, but not much, and I just kind of hung out with people, and I was kind of timid. And because of that, and for other factors, people gave me this label of, oh, Tim might be gay, and there was nothing indicative of that. I never hit on guys. I never had any desire for that, but it's just people saw what they wanted to see in my life and they treated me accordingly. And I think labels are weird in that it's our rational way, I guess, to safely and clearly define what we think about somebody. And sometimes it's true, like you can tell if somebody's threatening, you can tell if somebody's good natured, so I think you could also have good and bad labels.
Yeah, I suppose so. I think labels can be pretty broad too, whereas someone would look at some, like you're mentioning, some aspect, like they just don't know all of you, and then they'll just bam, gay, that's it, you're gay. Like it's just this broad overstatement over your entire life, regardless of your everyday actions and what you're actually doing. That is their perception of you projected onto you, and now there you go, just slap that label right on like a sticker, just put it right on the person. Now you're gay. Like, it's just stupid.
It's weird also, because since there are good and bad labels, there are different times that we lean into it and that we don't, for both reasons. Like, there are so many times I was labeled in school and I was like, that's not me, and I did everything I could to disprove that and to get away from it. But then there are other times that people gave me positive labels that also were not me.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yes.
And I leaned into that as well, and that's equally as unhealthy.
Yeah, positive labels can also be a curse. Because it's like, then you feel like you have to live up to this standard, which may not actually be you, and it's not helpful. It's like, okay, it's like, I'm glad they're not negatively labeling me, but positively incorrectly labeling me. Like if you're labeled strong, this person is strong and no one sees your internal struggles whatsoever, you can then try to like pretend to be strong so that that label sticks, and now you're crumbling on the inside, but it's like on the outside people look like you have it all together, and it's just you don't know how to reach out for help. And so like I guess you could just really say like a label is just, it can be good, it can be bad, positive, negative, doesn't really matter, but it's something that either you put on yourself or someone else put on you, and it's usually like either a word or a couple of words, and it's just like a quick description of that person. So gay is a label, strong is a label, optimistic, carefree, lazy, procrastinative.
Well, I think people also look at the results of your life and they think, okay, well, because you have this result, this must be the indicative features that led up to that. Like I'm just thinking about the relationship between me and my brother in school. And I know that he, to some degree, compared himself to me. And there were a lot of people that said, oh, you should be more like Tim. You should be more like this, because there are areas where I'm strong and he's weak and vice versa. But it's like, just because I have a certain fruit in my life doesn't mean that these behaviors or these proficiencies or these perspectives are true. I think that's kind of interesting as well, because, it just, that shows that there's also comparison in there somewhere.
Yeah. And so that's what a label is. It's and it where it comes from, I guess, can be different, but I feel like for that we can go to our guest. So with us today, you won't be seeing his face today just for specific reasons, but you will be hearing him. Our guest today, his name is Alex, and we were talking about him yesterday. We're excited to have him on board. Alex has been our friend for several years. I've known him for at least 6 years now. I think it was like 2015. I was at a potluck and he was there, and it was like, who is this man? Who is this man? And he's great. He's really good when it comes to just like bringing awesome stories to the table, because his life is full. Like we really wanted to have him on because if there's anyone who understands labels and what that does to a man and how it affects you, and then how to specifically grow beyond that, it would be Alex. Because we're talking, he's had different things, from being hospitalized frequently to having a rough past with his family to other things, and I want him to go into that a little bit more. But I would like to introduce you now, Alex, to the group. You can unmute yourself so you can be heard.
I'm here, and I love the labels already that you're starting with. I'm a good man. Wonderful. Man, talk about labels that aren't often deserved, but very much appreciated. You guys are awesome.
So Alex, Tim, speaking of labels, Tim, he is the best one when it comes to coming up with questions, especially in an interview process. I'm learning. I've got a couple questions myself here. I got two. All right, two questions, but Tim has more, and I think they're probably better than mine. So I'll let you ask the questions, Tim.
Brandon, why don't we just rename this Thought Raid with Tim Denock? Just
Wow.
I'm all we need. That's me. Oh my God. So a little bit more backstory on Alex as well. I've known Alex. Alex, what year did we meet?
2014, I believe.
2014. I remember. I think this was the first time I met you, and it was at Seth Wingate's house out in the little sunroom, and we were talking about something. I think it was unique talents that we have that nobody else has. And you did this crazy thing where you kicked above your head, and I'm like, what's going on with this guy? Like, he just seems different, And that I was putting my own labels on you at that time because you are shorter than most guys of your age. And you have different features because of your past and all. You're also missing a thumb. And, like there's all these things that I started thinking about you just because of what I saw, all these labels, And I think the strange thing is, like, you're such an extreme person in so many ways. Like, for those of you who don't know, my wife and I used to do a homeless ministry downtown here in Winston, and Alex was one of our three amigos. Like, he knows everybody in Winston. He knows freaking everybody in Winston. And
I'm
so,
that guy. I'm that guy.
yeah, so he
If
would
you're
come
with
around
me
downtown
now,
with us.
you probably know me.
But that's the thing about Alex. He is very open with people, and he pursues people, and he loves interacting and just being a man about town. He's like Winston-Salem's Ferris Bueller.
Oh, that's the best compliment I've ever had.
Yeah, but the reason I'm telling you all this stuff, and the reason why Brandon's intro was so important, was you've got all these details about him, but you've not yet heard him speak about himself, and you're already forming these opinions. You're already forming these labels. So, Alex, I kind of want to open this up with just talking about your childhood, how you were I guess reared. That's kind of a strange word to pose.
Old school, man.
Yeah, but what kind of difficulties did you face that were just a part of your lot in life growing up?
Okay, fantastic. Well, good question to start with. Let me just first say, though, for those of you who don't know, I am shorter than the average guy, so kicking above my head is not a huge feat, but it seemed to impress him, so I'm good with that. So anyway, part of the reason for my stature and the fact that I'm missing my thumb that Tim prefaced was because I was born with pretty significant congenital cardiac defects. And at the time that I was born, the doctors didn't know a lot about the condition, and they still don't. Throughout the years, I've been talking about labels. I've been labeled as having certain medical issues, and even then, the doctors weren't 100% sure. And even now, nearly 4 decades later, I'm still discovering things about myself with the help of the advance of technology and new doctors, what I may have, what I may be dealing with. But so due to the fact that I was born with a congenital cardiac problem, essentially, for those of you who don't know, I just had a really significantly deformed heart. And I was fresh out of the womb, basically, facing my mortality.
Wow.
I had to have significant open heart surgery at 6 weeks old.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's something that I can imagine my parents were just struggling to deal with, especially after having 2 siblings ahead of me. So I was the third
Mhm.
born out of 4 total, and all my siblings are healthy. There's no real cause or indication or knowledge as to why I was born the way I was. In fact, the medical diagnosis states environmental insult, meaning that they kind of weren't sure. They guessed that something in the environment influenced my mother during pregnancy.
Huh.
And I just happened to be born with some significant cardio and pulmonary issues. Pulmonary meaning not being able to get significant oxygenated blood flow.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So moving forward, as you guys can imagine, growing up was quite difficult. The first surgery was intended to be a Hail Mary, if you will, to find out, hey, if this kid's gonna die, let's just see what we can do. We don't know that it'll work. It's not a guarantee, but we know
Mhm.
that if we do nothing, he's definitely not gonna make it through the night. And it was quite literally a through the night Hail Mary. And so they did. And by God's grace, I survived the surgery and my body began to adapt with its limitations. And I grew in this new body with some pretty significant limitations. Better than some people in some ways, and not as good as many people, in some ways. We each have our own difficulties, our own limitations, if you will, to deal with. I've just learned to adapt with mine quite well, I think.
Yeah, something that you said kind of piqued my interest because I was thinking about me and my brother. You said that your siblings didn't deal with any of this stuff, and they were your older siblings. So, how did that influence your relationship with your parents? How did that stress, your early childhood, all that? Talk about that if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. And great question again, Tim, because it really early on gave me kind of a sense of inferiority. I mean, having
Hmm.
two older brothers, I was smaller than everybody. Having a heart condition, especially low oxygenation, it's key to mention here that I was always lethargic. So not only did I already feel physically poor, feel physically bad, and we all know that when you feel terrible, oftentimes you're emotionally distraught. And so with my brothers, I looked up to them. Oftenly, I
Hmm.
joked that I had to because they were bigger, but I really looked up to them because they were physically well. They got to do a lot of things that I didn't feel like I really had a fair opportunity, such as sports,
Mhm.
Boy Scouts,
Hmm.
things of that nature that is almost like iconic American, girls joins Girl Scouts, boys join Boy Scouts, they play sports, they do things, they go on school field trips. And a lot of my life was centered around how they can allow me to live a quote unquote normal life, but still protect me and keep me from things that could easily hurt me or cause me a lot of distress.
Hmm.
And so I early on became envious, angry, jealous, resentful. Not always directly at them, but certainly these were feelings that I struggled with,
Hmm.
and not only just with my siblings, but it began to spill over into my relationship with God.
Hmm. That's interesting. So I know that you had kind of a tough childhood with your dad as well.
Yes, yes.
I'm just thinking about people in my life right now who have um, family members who are having difficulties medically, and even in a household where it's like not specifically just Christian, because that can mean so many things. I'm talking about
Sure.
Jesus led households. That stuff is still really difficult, but in households where it's like things are kind of shaken up morally. When there's extra pressure added, when people are pressed, what's inside of them comes out. Like, what was that like for your dad, and how did he respond to all this with you, and how that like hurt your relationship with him?
Okay. Well, um, I think looking back on it, I'd love very much to say, and I do say this with sincerity, that my mom and my dad, I think, absolutely did do the best that they knew how to at the time. Um, Unfortunately, growing up, I felt that there was a lot of lack in the type of emotional support that I needed.
Mm.
Hmm.
Um, I definitely saw myself, irregardless of the truth or what other people would say, I saw myself as someone who was a special needs child. And I clung to an idea that my parents should really, really be more supportive emotionally and just verbally kind of, I see some of my friends now, and I see the way their father and their mother have a very strong relationship with the Lord. And I kind of felt like I missed out on a lot of that. I think my dad, in his own way, pushed me to try to be a strong man.
Hmm.
But he didn't really have the emotional intelligence to do it in a way that was healthy. So oftentimes I felt misunderstood. um, I felt like they put a label on me as being a baby or being spoiled or taking advantage of a situation when more often than not I felt physically miserable It was hard for me to
Mhm.
want to participate with things, even things as simple as going on vacation. A lot of people would say, "Hey, how could that be difficult?" But when you're physically sick, when you feel lethargic, when you're very tired, when just walking is a chore, and you're with a group of people that the closest are closest to you, it's hard to often convey, "Hey, I can't do this right now," especially when you feel a pressure to keep up with everyone
Mhm.
else. And not having a family that I felt like understood that fully. And to be fair, how could they? Because I was the only one really dealing with what I was going through. Of course, they were dealing with it from their perspective, but no
Mhm.
one was walking in my shoes but me.
Mm.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brandon.
I was just thinking, I mean, like, it's really difficult as one who has had to repeatedly be humiliated because of my, like, oh, this is the way everything is ordered and stuff. I understand how difficult it could be to describe something that you feel and you're going through, and you actually, it's not something you're trying to happen, it's just how it's happening, like, to someone who isn't going through that. It's like, in that person's mind and in my mind, I'm like, well, you should just be able to do this and this and this. And then, like, if you were them, yes, you should be able to do that, but you're not them. And
Mhm.
it's a whole different story. And I've had to been humiliated a couple of times on that with some people that are like, like, this is, I know this may be normal to you, this is not easy or normal to me. And, like, I've had to, like, take a step back and be like, wait a minute, okay, like, I need to trust their process, and trust that they want to accomplish certain things, rather than like, I gotta, like, help you in this area until you get to my level on it or something of that nature. And it's just like, I've had to, like,
Mhm.
come back from it. So, like, I in this moment, through what I've been through, I can sympathize with what you're talking about, because I have been the one who has been unhelpful to people like you, without realizing, like, you have other things that you're coming through and stuff. Not to say that you need to be like, what, like you said, like, not to say by any shape, way, or form that you needed to be babied or anything of that nature, but it's like, to see that you are growing beyond those things, and to give yourself grace, to give you grace as a person who's not going through them, while at the same time not also like, well, you're just this or whatever, because you didn't fit into the box that I set that I'm capable of doing, and you're capable in your own way. And it's just, I don't know, this is just what's kind of hitting me in this moment. I don't know. I feel like I'm
Mhm.
blabbering, but this is what's kind of hitting me in this
And I
moment.
think also, when you're having labels imposed upon you or you're believing labels about yourself, it's so difficult to navigate them in a healthy way and actually grow through them. I'm not talking about avoid them and stuff them down. I'm talking
Right.
about like confronting them and growing through them. It's so hard to do that when you feel like you doing that and you dealing with what you have to deal with, especially if it's a permanent issue or a possibly permanent issue, it is a stressor to everybody around you. Because I've had things like that in my life, and it just feels like, okay, well, if I navigate my process and if I do things in a healthy way for me, it's going to stress and be unloving to the people around me that I want to love. So, you know what? I'm not going to deal with my issues. I'm just going to fake it until I make it for these people.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
But
And Tim, you mentioned being in high school and labels that were placed on you. I can recall being in high school, and um I kind of never really felt like I fit into any particular group. Everybody is familiar with the kind of the cliche groups. You have the preps, you have the goths, you got the skateboarders, you got the whatever. Everybody had their own group, and more often than not,
mhm,
everybody kind of fit into one different clique. And I remember kind of throughout most of my childhood and teenage formative years feeling so far out of any kind of clique, if you will, that I just in some ways, I became like a chameleon and tried to fit into every little group. And in other ways, I felt like I was always on the outside. You know, people could never truly understand me. People could get to know me on a surface level. People could, you know, perhaps be acquaintances. Some people really loved being around me. Um, I,
Hmm.
I'm fortunate that I had a very charismatic father and I kind of hung on his coattails as a kid. So I grew up being able to speak freely to people, and so they helped a lot, but internally I still always felt very much alone, misunderstood, kind of on an island unto myself, if you will. And that's when I think things changed for me as far as the way I viewed the world, not just others, but I started really thinking about my relationship with God. And I think the big takeaway here, what I'd like to get into this evening is the talk about your own identity within Christ. That's when things majorly started changing for me. I mean, because growing up, we certainly went to church. I wouldn't say that I grew up in a Christian household. I'm sure my parents would argue that point. I think we had religion, and we definitely went to a Catholic church, or a couple of them, but I didn't have the type of figures that would sit down and go over the Bible with me and say, "How is this applicable to your life? Do you know how important it is to continually seek after God and have a real relationship with Him?" Because I needed a lot. I had a lot of questions. I had a lot of fears. I was dealing with a lot of impending, what felt like impending doom. No
Hmm.
child should ever have to face their mortality, but then to do it time and time again, it begins to make you feel like, hey, do I really have any worth in this world? And the best place to find answers to that question is in the Word of God.
Mm.
And I didn't realize that for a long time. I think I knew it in my mind, but I struggled to connect it with my heart.
Mm.
Well, let me ask you this: did you ever struggle first and foremost with being accepted over God? Because I know that, especially in middle school, high school, there's the overwhelming urge to belong, like you were saying, the cliques, the cliche groups or whatever. There's an urge that we all have to belong to something, to know that, oh, well, this group accepts me for the way that I am. Was there any part of you that felt more so like, okay, I can't be honest with myself and I can't have that relationship with God because I want these people to accept me and not see me for my labels?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good question because I definitely
Hmm.
struggled to just want to be bigger, be taller, be able to physically run, jump, play sports, do things that just made me feel more accepted. And it's funny because even at a young age, I understood the difference between not being in worldliness, not seeking after those types of things that ultimately bear no fruit, really. I think even from a young age, God was speaking to my heart, even though I wasn't really listening, trying to express that He was building character. He was shaping me into a man that could understand things that nobody else could. Um, but but I was so rooted in the world and in what I wanted at that time that I think I oftentimes sacrificed truth for, yeah, but I want to feel great now. Yeah, but I want to go out with those people now and hang out and just be one of the guys, be one of the cool kids, wear the letter jacket, do all that. And certainly I think there were times that just those thoughts dominated me.
Hmm.
Um yeah.
Well, you know, I've seen pictures of you in your early 20s, like that one where you had the long hair and you looked kind of emo. And then there's all these stories that you have about, the car shows and your family owning things downtown and the party life and stuff. So that seems completely different than your childhood, where there were all these limitations and Alex couldn't and he wasn't good enough. And, when you told me all these stories of your 20s, I was like, wow, holy crap, that's how I wanted to be. So talk to me a little bit about the labels, the difference there, because the way you saw yourself and the things you operated in as a kid seemed like they were a complete 180 from your young adult life.
Yeah, so I think at a point, and I can't really define when it was, but I do think at a point I decided that, I'm tired of being told I can't. I'm tired of being told that I shouldn't even. And so I started to live a life um, that was arguably reckless. I started living a life that really was all about, okay, how can I feel great? How can I still accomplish the things I want to do, and feel like I'm doing what honors me the most. And
Hmm.
and so I knew early on that I was never going to grow up and be a quarterback, but it certainly wasn't going to stop me from, as you prefaced, going out there and living the party life and interacting with people and kind of
Hmm.
being the Ferris Bueller type, the man about town, knowing everybody, being involved in all types of circles. I think I got a lot in the way of self-esteem that I didn't get from my family, from just being the man that everybody knew, the
Hmm.
person that people really liked, having a smaller stature, feeling limited on the inside. Was something that I lived with. And so I struggled with a poor sense of self worth and self identity. And so I often think that I gravitated to situations that let me sort of excel. And let's be honest, when you're at a party and making jokes and having a good time, it's easy for anybody to just sort of excel in that area. You can be emotionally bankrupt inside, but still be the life of the party. You can still have fun. You can still make people laugh and have a good time. I was lucky that my family had some sort of, I don't know, I guess you'd call it local fame, in a small town where
Hmm.
people just everybody knows who you are. And I grew up in a scene that we practically helped pioneer. So even in my high school years, it was nice to kind of have that under my belt because I felt like I lacked in so many other areas, but everybody knew Alex. Everybody loved to hang out with Alex. Everybody had fun. And I almost never said no. So meaning that there were plenty of times that I just found myself in different situations, oftentimes around the wrong people, the wrong crowds, doing things that I definitely shouldn't have been. I think I started to devalue my own life and my own worth here,
Hmm.
thinking that, okay, if I don't measure up to a box, if I was born broken already, then to hell, I might as well just kind of commit social, emotional, moral suicide in a way. I might as well just enjoy my life while I have it because I
Hmm.
don't know when it's going to be taken.
Yeah.
Do you
So,
think
like,
I have
oh,
actually I have a question that's been born from all of that, and that would be looking back in hindsight, and but like the craziness that you began to live as you're going coming out of high school, going into your 20s and stuff of that nature. Um, do you think like you said like you just like what I'm just gonna commit emotional, social, whatever, suicide, all that kind of stuff, which is an extreme statement. But do you think it wouldn't have been quite as dramatic if you didn't have all these different labels you were trying to contend with growing up?
Yeah, certainly. I think that added to a lot of the pressure to be a certain way. And let me clarify that. I think a lot of that pressure wasn't put on by other people necessarily.
Mm,
Sure, there was some, but oftentimes the limitations we have and the pressure we have on ourselves are ones that we impose on ourselves.
mm,
I mean, I think what it boils down to, if somebody is lacking in a real solid sense of self identity in Christ,
mm,
that we ourselves are going to just start to manifest our own kind of identity. I mean,
mm,
you can either see yourself as God sees you, or you can begin to kind of gravitate towards what the world is telling you. I mean,
Mm,
let's face it, the minute we come into this world, the enemy is telling you what to think, what to value, what to wear, what to possess, what's important, what's not important, and there's a lot of things coming at us.
yeah.
It's just constant static.
Hmm.
So unless you clear the filter and get rid of the static and start to kind of fill your mind with truth and a real identity in Christ, it's easy to just cling to everything. I mean,
Mm.
I'm sure you guys have heard that old story about we each have a hole inside of us,
A God-shaped
and
hole.
it's a God-shaped hole, right?
Yeah.
Right, and we're constantly trying to fill it with everything. It's funny, you know, you guys had me on as a guest, and I appreciate that, but I don't feel so uniquely different from everybody else. I think the thing about my story that resonates is that regardless of what anybody else is struggling with, I think we all, at the root of it, struggle with an identity in Christ and knowing what that is. And until we get to a place of residing in that and comfortably living in that and believing that, we're going to always try to fill ourselves
With
with
something.
what feels good, what looks right, what the world says is appropriate, you know, and that's just a commonality of the human disorder.
Yeah.
Hmm.
What you were talking about made me think of this one thing, and then I'll let you resume with your questions, Tim. Um,
Hmm.
was that I feel like a lot of times the reason why labels can very much so hurt us is because we've already labeled ourselves. So
Right.
when then once we have labeled ourselves in some negative way, and then someone says something that comes even close to how we've negatively labeled ourselves or incorrectly labeled ourselves, apart from how God would specifically say we are, it could mean and hurt so much more, and give a landing strip for that self hatred to kind of kick in. I feel like because it's just like because you were mentioning like more than how other people saw you, and occasionally they would label you. You had your own predefined labels of yourself through what you were feeling, what you had been through, stuff of that nature was already affecting you.
Hmm.
Right. Right.
It kind of hit me.
So, Alex, you were talking about all this stuff. How you went from having for lack of better verbiage, a life of lack to a life of too much. You know, and you were
Right.
balls to the walls. Uh, that's not the term I wanted to use, but you know what I'm saying. Just like living your life to live your life to make yourself feel good, right? And
Right.
I think it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of people do that where you come from lack, and because of the lack, you rebel, and you know you're in this ditch over here, and you completely miss the road, and you go into the other ditch on the opposite side. You know,
Right.
but there was something that happened, and there was an
Right.
experience that you had that brought all that to a close. The question I wanted to ask, I guess I'll just go ahead and throw it in chat because this is where we're going. Was what was the big turning point for you in learning to respond well to your labels? So
Right.
basically, something happened, and then that put a stop to this crazy lifestyle that you had, and then you came out the other side feeling some other kind of. Excuse me. Would you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that experience and how that changed your perspective?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. And let me start by saying I think it's really obvious the Bible talks about, you know, you can only serve one master.
Mm.
And I think when you're living, oftentimes when I tell this story, I tell people that the biggest disconnect prior to coming out to the other side, so to speak, was that I was living a life paying homage to Alex, worshiping Alex, whatever made him feel great, whatever made him
Mhm.
feel good, whatever made him feel better than what he had always felt. I did it, you know, certainly. And because of that, as I referenced earlier, living a destructive life, a pattern in life that was very much headed for a collision course. It led me to jail, and it led me to jail not only once but a couple of times, and ultimately, in the end, having to serve a 10-year prison sentence. As you guys already know, for our viewers, I spent quite a number of years locked up and confinement because I continued to struggle with my own pride. I continued to struggle with doing what I felt like, hey, this
Hmm.
makes me feel wonderful. This is an identity that I've taken on for myself, and I didn't really have a solid sense of self-worth. But God got
Hmm.
me to a place, and I realized, talking about this, that sometimes it could come off as cliche, because I myself have talked to and heard from many people who've done time behind bars and later come out and talked about kind of a quote unquote jailhouse conversion. Well, let me tell you, that's not my story. I definitely didn't have a jailhouse conversion.
Hmm.
If anything, I kind of felt like I continued to harbor resentment, anger, and even hatred towards God. What I didn't preface earlier was, in those formative years, I struggled with knowing God and the belief that I do love Him, yet acting in complete opposition to that. I think I
Hmm.
resented Him. So for years, I was angry because I thought, well, hey, I've got three siblings that are completely healthy. They're physically, well off. They have all their cognitive function is great, and not that mine was impaired by any means, but I certainly, having lack of oxygenation, made it difficult for me to focus on stuff, made it difficult for me to really pay attention, being lethargic, all that stuff. It added to it. So I started to really nitpick and see what I didn't have, and forgot completely to focus on what I did have. And so
Hmm.
I thought, did God did he somehow smite me in my mother's womb before I had even had a chance in the world? I
Hmm.
felt like there was a personal vendetta against me. Like maybe I was paying for the sins of my father or my father's father or so on. And it was such a immature way of looking at things. I didn't know God. I thought I knew him. I think I understood what the Bible said about him, but I didn't have a real relationship with him. And
Hmm.
so I careened into a situation where I found myself literally sitting on my hands and feet in an 8 by 10 prison cell, surrounded by steel and concrete and a whole lot of really undesirable people, alone. Even though I still had my family, there was nothing they could do for me. I was completely alone. I'd lost my possessions. I'd lost things that I had personal value in.
Hmm.
And I thought I had basically lost everything in life. What did happen before the conversion was that, sitting in jail, it became really apparent to me for the first time in my life that, now that I've lost everything, I'm sort of in a prime position to realize I already have everything I could ever need.
Hmm.
And that was something, maybe a seed that God placed in my mind early on. And at the
Hmm.
time, I thought about it, but it didn't really begin to germinate until a few years later. Prison life was, suffice it to say, very difficult. But prison life, as a special needs person, somebody with so many physical limitations, um, let me go ahead and say here for our viewers, in my lifetime, to really drive home the point, I have been hospitalized 66 different times
Wow.
for heart and pulmonary related stuff.
Hmm.
Um, probably, to be fair, half a dozen times or more for other unrelated things, like being in a terrible car accident where I went through a windshield. Um, fracturing my skull where I was trying to kick above my head for somebody else, Tim, and that one didn't go so well.
Oh
So
dear.
I definitely had my share of being in and out of situations where I literally felt the hand of God over my life, and I am a living, walking, talking miracle. You might ask
Mhm.
yourself, well, how can somebody who's experienced God in such real ways be so hell bent on destruction and not even really be looking towards God and walking in that? And I think that's because I really needed to get to a place where I could open my ears, where I could sit down, take away all the static from the world. Now, certainly, there's plenty of static in prison. If anything, you're surrounded by a lot of negativity, a lot of opposition. The enemy will try to get at you there. The enemy will tell you, well, now you're a criminal, so act like a criminal.
Mhm.
Now you're worthless, so show people you have no worth. And I had to
Alex,
combat a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
if I could ask you, because I think you're mounting this really awesome case about how it's really easy for people to view you a specific way. I mean,
Right.
dude, just being your friend, I know what you've been through and all these things, and I look at you and I'm like, wow, Alex has a life that's completely different from everybody else because he's got all this opposition and all this tribulation and all these things that's working against him, and yet he has all this crazy stuff that's happening that's good too. He doesn't lead an average life. you know
No,
and
not at all.
sometimes I look at you and like this question I just put up on the screen, and I just think to myself, if there's anybody that's learned how to do this, Alex is one of those people. So, Alex, people that are dealing with labels, people that are dealing with things that have been placed on them, things they're believing about themselves, like how do you disassociate your identity from your circumstances? So, if somebody's watching this and they're thinking, "Well, I believe on this," or people tell me, how do you disassociate your identity from that?
Okay, fantastic. Well, so it goes back again to understanding your worth in terms of what God says, not what the world says. Let me first answer your previous question. A big turning point for me was we already know how I always felt, but I read the story, the parable one time about the blind man where these people had asked Jesus, whose sin was it that this man had been born blind? They asked
Mm-hmm.
him, was it the father's sin or the mother's? Jesus' response was neither the father's nor the mother's, but so that God's glory be made manifest in his life. And I think I got to a turning point in my perspective and realized that instead of viewing the whole world as half empty, glass half empty, that maybe I had been looking at it all wrong, that God didn't smite me. God didn't attack me or put his finger on me to bruise me. I think when you're born into a fallen and broken world, if I may just say, sometimes shit happens. Why are babies born with cancer? Or, things like that. We all know that the world has so many terrible atrocities and we all have our own struggles to live with. But I think what God does in each and every one situation is he takes that circumstance and he uses it for his glory. God sharpens us. The Bible says he chastises those he loves. Um, I love and dislike that verse because I think it alludes that he only picks the ones he loves. I think God loves us all, and so he chastises us all in different moments throughout our lives. And I think what that
Mm-hmm.
means is that he's trying to build and refine our identity and build our character. And we know what the word says about the building of character. So I think if people are struggling in a type of identity, I would encourage them to literally get in the word and actually see what God says about you. It reminds me of Dan Moeller. I can't quote him well, but I know a lot of people have gone to him for prayer and said, "Hey, I'm struggling with this, or this is going on in my life right now. I need some prayer. Could you pray for me?" And oftentimes he'll respond with just say, "You don't need prayer, brother or sister. You need to rely on what the Word of God says about you, God's truth." We have this manuscript, this Bible, this Word that's inspired directly from God, and it's absolute truth. They call it the living word. And I think that's because his life takes root in us. And so all these labels I had once before, these preconceived notions that I placed on myself, that others may have given to me based off of a blush impression or surface information, I realized quickly that none of it mattered.
Yeah.
I realized that the only measurement by which I should be holding myself to is what God says about me
Yeah.
and what I should be acting on,
Yeah.
love in its purest form. And not to sound trite, but at the end of your life, the only currency that's going to matter is how well you loved others
Yeah.
and how well you love yourself and how well
And
you let God love
yeah,
you.
and thinking about that, it was interesting. Like I didn't think of it from this perspective until you mentioned it, but you'd mentioned that, you're talking about the one that God disciplines those he loves. But I could think of God and how he's disciplined many people, some of which may never have come to accept his son as their savior, but still disciplined them. And so it's just like I think that I don't think we need to just apply that to God disciplines only Christians, like, and
Right.
therefore only loves Christians. No, I think that he disciplines everyone at some point or other in their lives as a way of, like, you are self-destructing, and I'm not
Right.
going to let you self-destruct in this season of your life, so that hopefully you'll come to realize that I am better than what you're trying to do right now. And probably some people he's probably disciplined over and over and over again, because you have the scripture verse that all the governing authorities that are out there God has put on this earth for a
Right.
reason.
Right.
So I know some people have probably been, a lot of people have been in and out of jail frequent times. Is probably one of the most common ways of his discipline for people who just want to continue to self-destruct and live
Well,
only
Brandon,
for
I think it's
themselves.
I think it's important to note too that God's obviously aware of what goes on at any given moment, all
Right.
time, past, present, and future. And and I think oftentimes it's less about God's discipline too. And the real moral of the story is God already knows that we discipline ourselves enough as it is. We already have to contend with the punishment of the world, living in a fallen and broken world where the principalities and rulers of this world are constantly coming against us. I put myself in prison. Let me just state that for the record. Like, I don't think God chastised me by putting me there. And I don't think he often works in that method. I think what he does more than anything is uses the circumstances in our lives to paint a picture of his love for us so that he may be glorified, so that he may always be at the center point of whatever we're going through. God can take any kind of situation, no matter how dark, how bleak, how seemingly hopeless it is, and say that I am still here with you. I am still fighting alongside you. This battle is mine, not yours. Give up your life, cling to me, and I will always see you through this situation. I think I've talked to you guys individually about this. I'm a strong proponent of the belief that God never puts you in a situation without providing you with all the resources to
You need.
just to see you through that
Yeah.
circumstance. And as you guys already know, some of the amazing, incredible things I've been through, surgeries, prison, family struggles, just life stuff in general. There's never been a single moment of my life where God wasn't right there walking me through it. The difference is my perspective.
Yeah.
The difference is that I decided, when I decided to stop playing around with how what I think, and taking the world's, we'll see something on TV, a small, quick example, and we'll take it as absolute fact, and then we'll regurgitate that fact to the next
Hmm.
person, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, there are a couple of kinds of people in the world. There are people who will read scripture to search for words that support their own distorted view of truth. And then there are those who will read the word of God looking for absolute truth. And when you realize that you are lost and that you are broken and that you're just standing around like a child with a broken toy in your hand, completely helpless, and saying, "Hey, God, I don't know what to do about this, but I know you have the answers. Please help." You hold it up to him and you let the master of all fix it for you.
So
There
yeah.
was a defining moment where I was lying in the hospital, and someone was praying over me, and I'll never forget this. I think that's what started to open my eyes. He said, "Alex, you will never know that God is all you need until God is literally all you have." And
Ah.
and and
Ah.
that is so true. I
Alex.
think that got to me.
I God had that same. He said those same exact words to me a couple of weeks ago, and I mentioned this in Thought Raid. I've for those who remember that I'm in a place right now that unless support starts coming in for what we're doing, I'm gonna have to eventually find another job because I've got maybe like I think we finally worked some things out with unemployment, so I should be getting some employment hopefully in soon because there was something that was kind of preventing that from coming through. So hopefully I'll be able to go a little bit further than before. But at that point in the beginning of the month, nothing was, and for what I could tell, I was able to make it about a month before I would desperately need another job. And freaking, I was in church, and I was having communion, and as I'm breaking the bread, like I hear my voice, God's like, "Are you willing to lose it all?" And I was just like, "Oh." Like, get behind me, Satan. Like, what? Like, what is this I'm hearing in the middle of communion? And I just kind of semi-dismissed it, semi-answered, and it was like, if that's you, God, then only if you want me to. But then the next day, I had a lunch with Kyle, and who I might actually be seeing tonight. And but anyways, we were talking about like putting things on the altar so that there's nothing between you and God. So I was putting Thought Ray in the altar that night, and nothing changed on the inside of me. It was like, well, did I put it on the altar? And God's like, of course you did. If you didn't, you wouldn't have willingly done that. It's there. You may not feel anything, but it is there. So I was like, okay, so what else is going on? And I was like, God, why haven't you told me to do anything different? Like, why have you been so quiet when I'm this close to hitting the ground financially? And God was like, I'm not going to tell you anything different until you've lost it all. And then he was like, once I am all that you have, then you'll know that I am all that you need. I was just like, man, when you
Amen.
said that, I was
Amen.
like, where have I heard these words? Oh, yes. Ah, that is God.
Right.
Why?
Right.
And
And for our viewers, I'll just tiniest quick backstory. The time I heard that, I was actually recovering in the hospital. I had a cerebral abscess in the right temporal lobe of my brain, and I was in recovery before going back into the hospital to have a cosmetic like cranioplasty. They basically cut into my head, removed an abscess, and they were going to go back in and put the actual skull bone that they removed from my head back in place. And in this particular night, it was so memorable because right after the gentleman in my hospital room prayed for me, that very night I had a massive seizure and coded. I went into cardiac arrest. They struggled to get me back. Thank God they got a pulse on me, but when they did, I had been without oxygen for so long that my body actually slipped into a coma, and I remained in coma for a week, an entire week. I had been transported to another hospital where I was given care, and once again, a grim prognosis. My family was called. They said to say their goodbyes. all these things. They were told that I would probably never come out of the coma. Even if I did, I would be vegetative at best until ultimately my body kind of died. And man, I woke up a week later. I struggled to walk, I struggled to talk, and I struggled to move around. And I underwent a lot of occupational and physical rehabilitation. But I tell you what, I woke up with such clarity in my mind that I realized, God is truly, truly reaching out to me in epic ways. Some of us, Tim, some of us are just plain hard headed.
Mhm.
Some of us really do need a lot of grace, and I'll raise my both of my hands to those and say that I knew that early on God really needed to draw me into a place of actually opening my eyes and my ear gates to him and listening, and he did it amazingly, even through all that, in such gentle and loving ways that I
Mm.
listened. It was time and time again. I've often talked to you guys about how my friendships with you guys and our other friends slowly began to shift my perspective on people. But dealing with a God who is amazing, gentle, long suffering. We all understand the passage in 1 Corinthians 13 when it describes the attributes of love.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
believe we're literally reading a story about God's character right there. That's
Mm.
God's character 100%. And dealing with that time and time again, I felt a lot like a wounded animal that had been picked up at a rescue shelter and taken home to the most patient, kind, loving, long-suffering family, and over time it broke away at my heart at all the walls and the toughness built up. And I realized, okay, I'm where I need to be. I'm listening. And once I started to listen, and for the people struggling with identity and labels that maybe they don't associate with or that they don't like or whatever, I would just appeal to them and say, listen to God. What Measure yourself with what the truth says about you. Put your name in the Bible. I know each Bible we have doesn't have our actual names written there, but yeah, I have a Bible where I've literally written Alex in many places because I know that it's talking about me, that God is talking about me and saying, this is who I say you are.
Mm.
And if God says it, who's anybody else to discount
I
it?
know. Yeah. Yeah. I think probably one of the most, and let me know if you agree with this, but probably one of the most important factors in overcoming a label and overcoming how other people will see you or how you see yourself is to accept what God says about you and to do everything in your power to believe it regardless of how you feel or how you're treated.
Right, and I do agree with that. And let me just emphasize, like, it's not easy. It's incredibly difficult. After I came home from prison, especially, I was faced with a lot of challenges. Where can I live? Where can I get a job? Are people going to trust me? Are people going to think I'm a criminal or just think that I have shaky character or this or that? And actually, even meeting you guys, I think if you'll recall back in the beginning years ago, there was a part of me that was a little standoffish and apprehensive about letting you guys in and opening up because I definitely always wanted to be judged by my character and my merits, not the mistakes that I had made in my life. And
Mhm.
we all struggle with similar things, but it takes consistent grace. God says, my grace is sufficient. And I know that's something we've talked about, something we've said over and over. But let me tell you, there is nothing like sitting in a hospital bed, handcuffed and shackled to the bed when you can't even walk or talk hardly. To drive home the point that my grace is sufficient. God's grace is all encompassing, and we need to continue to come to the throne of grace daily and seek after him daily and talk with him, bare our soul to him, and begin to like make the transformation. The Bible talks about renewing of the mind.
Mm.
That's a daily process.
Yeah.
Jesus talks about taking up your cross. That is a daily process.
Yeah.
I think I've told you guys this, and I've mentioned it to others. I see our spiritual growth much like bodybuilding.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
nobody's born deadlifting 400 pounds or whatever. You know, we have to build that, and everybody knows by now that in order to build muscle and to let it grow, you have to tear it.
Yeah.
You physically have to tear muscles in order for them to stretch, grow, and be stronger.
Yeah.
It's the same with your spirit. You have to tear away the things of the world that are constantly fighting against God and saying, you, Brandon Brown, are this, and you, Tim, are never going to be that, you know,
Yeah.
and combat that and say, hey, I know what God says. That's what Jesus did time and time again. If you notice in the Bible, he never really said, I say. He said he was sent to do the Father's will.
Yeah.
The Father says, you know, what the Father wants. And he even held himself to that standard. And I think he did that so that we know that that's exactly what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So anytime I'm faced with someone who would attack me or think less of me or maybe want to disassociate themselves from me or, you know, whatever, I have to remind myself I'm uniquely qualified because Father in heaven, God, my Lord, my Savior, says that I am qualified.
Yeah.
That I was bought with a price, and that's all that matters.
Yeah.
That's literally all that matters. And I'm called to treat others in the same love. That's the only thing I can encourage people time and time again to do, and to do it consistently. Not one time, not on the weekend, not every now and again, but every day you wake up,
Yeah.
say to yourself, okay, this is how I'm going to respond today.
Yeah.
And it will be difficult,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I'm
That's
not alone.
that's the whole purpose of Thought Raid. That's why I started Thought Raid in the first place, because I recognize that getting to a place where you are healthy and that you're actively, like, how you view yourself is healthy, habits are healthy, you know, the people that you keep around your life is healthy. All of that is a daily process of coming and addressing the thoughts every day that come to your mind, because your mind will always bring you new doubts, worries, things to be resentful towards, whatever. It will always have its new share of problems each day, and that's what the Bible's talking about, picking up your cross and taking your thoughts captive and all that kind of stuff, because every day is a new challenge, and I recognize that. And so I want Thought Raid to be helpful to other people with it, to recognize that you will probably struggle with the same exact thought and just little nuances to it every day for a while, and that's okay. Just keep going, start again the next day. Let's address that thought and its nuances on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the days of the week, until eventually we can look back and recognize that thought hasn't come back, and we don't know when it ended, but we know it's not presently there because it's been addressed over and over and over and over again. Like, I'm hard-headed in certain areas, my own self, and, like, you know, like, just recently, like, God finally made some major breakthroughs when it came to works-based mentality, that I can trust him to take care of my needs, even though he has brought me back to specific scripture verses in the Word about, look at the lilies of the field, or the flowers of the field and the lilies of the water, like how beautiful they are, and how they don't do anything to do what they do. God just clothes them with beauty. Or the birds, they don't have farmhouses to store up all their food in. But God still provides them. How much more will he take care of you? Like, he is drilled that into my head over and over and over and over again, and I've resisted it so many times, because it's just like, I have been raised to believe that if I don't do it, who will? And, you know, it would be irresponsible for me to not already have had a job by now to take care of things even though I am working, even though I am doing things daily for Thought Raid and stuff of that nature, in my mind I still feel like I'm being irresponsible because I don't have a job yet that's paying me a lot of money to take care of all these different things. That's not the case. That's not what God's called me to. He's called me to this. And so he's finally been able to break through. It's like, you just need to trust me to the very end, and you can. Like, even if you lost everything, does not mean you're put outside of my ability to take care of your needs. You're walking in this in obedience. You're walking in this in faith. How much more am I able to take care of that? You're not even intentionally trying to resist me. So it's just like, so I get it. That's the whole crux of Thought Raid, is to address those daily thoughts and to be vulnerable with you guys so that you know that we all have our own garden variety of negative thinking that we have to work through that stands between where we're at now and where we're needed to head. And if we can take care of those thoughts and take them and make them line them up with reality and the reality that God has established, then we can become productive, we can become peaceful, we can become these things that are already there for us. We just have to actually believe that they're there and that we can have them, that we're worthy of them.
Right.
So,
Right. Hey,
yeah.
Brandon, can I mention? I think it's easy to fall into the struggle of the imposter syndrome. We all feel at some point of just like, hey, I don't, the imposter syndrome being like, I'm an imposter in this moment, that I'm not either living up to my potential, or that I'm doing the wrong thing here, or that this isn't really who I am. I think that's the enemy that will always try to create division where there is none, and in the hopes of distracting us from what God truly wants for our life. But you said the word multiple times, habits. And even though I don't see it written specifically as habits a lot in the Bible, I think God is a God of habits, and he's a God of really excellent habits. And I think that oftentimes he's trying to encourage us to just habitually, daily build these little life habits that lead to a wholesome, well-rounded life for us, even in the midst of struggles. Obviously the internet, even you guys have discussed, has been inundated with the pandemic, the current, COVID-19 pandemic. And it's funny, a lot of people ask me how I've dealt with it. And I like to joke that, well, hell, after spending 10 years in prison, it's no big deal to sit home and do nothing all day. But the truth is, it's a habit I built over time to learn to be happy with myself, to love myself, to be still in the moment, to be still and know that God is there. And I don't know about legalities here, but could I just mention a book, maybe endorse it a little bit?
Sure.
And say that one that I've read quite a few times that I think that's helped? I would always encourage people to seek after God and to read the Bible, because you can never go wrong there. And I think that's the first and last place you should always look. But one book I keep beside my bed that I've read multiple times is called Make Your Bed: Little Things That Can Change Your Life and Maybe the World. And it's based on the principle. It was written, anybody can Google it. It was written by retired U.S. Navy admiral. And it's based on how to build habits. It's based on the principle that if you do consistently do the little things in your life, step by step by step, going back to building muscles and equally building spiritual strength, build habits, build good habits, write them down, meditate on them, work on them. That's what's helped me to get through a lot of the negative moments in my life, a lot of the dark times when I felt like an imposter, when I felt like I couldn't do something, when I felt less than, when I felt like maybe I'm never gonna, because there's plenty of that to go around for everybody, not just a guy who's been in prison or a guy who's spent a life in and out of the hospital. I mean, I think there's just so much of that to go around for everybody. And it always It always surprises me how common our stories are, the threads that are there, that we all struggle with that. But if we build habits daily, daily habits, momentarily, in every moment of every day, um, focus on them, meditate on them, make them our life goal, then I think that it'll literally begin to transform your life. I think that's literally what renewing the mind is. And Tim, you may want to weigh in on this because I know we've talked about it in your own personal life, overcoming struggles, feeling like needing to be a provider, stuff like that too. And it's like I think, does that make sense for you? Could I pose that question to you? Like, how do you feel about overcoming, you know, how to disassociate your identity from your circumstances? I think part of it is it's renewing your mind, shifting your perspective. How do you shift your perspective? You start with building a fundamental habit. Get an idea of who you actually are from God and habitually revisit that every day.
Yeah, so I've just been sitting here thinking about how we can wrap this up because you guys are saying really good things, and everything you're saying is so relevant to a relationship with Jesus, And
100.
I like speaking to the people who aren't Christians as much as to the Christians themselves. But if you look at the original question, we defined what labels specifically were, and we defined it as, let me go back up to the notes, a perspective that may be either accurate based on past behaviors or inaccurate based on a person's assumption of our motive. And Alex, looking at your life, you had this early life where it seemed like there were all these circumstances that you were not in control of. Your health, the stress levels of your parents, how your friends and peers viewed you. There were all these things you couldn't control, but because of all that stuff you couldn't control, they viewed you a specific way and you received those labels. In your young adult life, you kind of turned a 180 and you said, to heck with that. I'm gonna change my behaviors so that maybe I can be this thing and like fill this void that I think that I have. And as you know now, that only Jesus can fill. And as you guys were talking about renewing your mind, I was thinking about what does that actually look like? And so, if we go back to the analogy of there being a road with two ditches on either side, on one side you have insecurity, the other side you have pride, and in the middle where you want to be is humility. Right? And, I was just thinking about music. So when you tune the G string on your, the G string, sorry. when you tune the strings on your guitar, sometimes your string,
which happens to have a G string.
Yeah. Well, when I string this guitar and I tune it, sometimes it's overtuned or undertuned, and we're like that. So when you're renewing your mind daily, you're trying to get in the middle, right there where the sweet harmony is, right? But if you think about the enemy, all the enemy does is he speaks to you. He tells you things that get you out of tune. If you go biblically and ask, just who exactly the enemy was, he was God's right-hand man, He was beautiful. He was a musician. He had a beautiful voice, played beautiful music. And I think that's kind of interesting how he is the one that always gets us out of tune because he continuously tells us who we're not in good and bad ways. And I say good ways because sometimes he tells us that we're more than we actually are. And that's where the pride comes into play. But, by renewing your mind daily, as Alex and Brandon have been saying, you say, God, okay, who am I, right? Am I this crazy, awesome person that I'm trying to be, or am I this insecurity that I'm running away from? And, Paul says that doesn't matter. You are, in your specific situation, perfect. God sees you as perfect. He uses all the crap that you're going through, your circumstances that you can't control and the circumstances you can control. He uses those beautifully. And, the result of where he's taking you is not as important as where you're at right now through what he's taking you. And I think that's why Alex's story is so good, because there's so many labels that he received. And, at one point he was kind of the victim, and at one point he was kind of the person that was imposing
The
the
victimizer.
yeah,
Yes.
or the assailant, the aggressor, whatever. On
Whatever. Yeah.
yeah, and it took a lot of humility to knock him down to where God could say, "Okay, Alex, let me talk to you." And so Alex was saying, a big part of it is just going to the Bible and saying, "Okay, God, what is your character? Who are you? What do you actually think of me?"
Hmm.
And
Right. Can I interject real quick, Tim? You
mhm,
mentioned control also, and I think it's important to note that I also realized at that point I actually never really had any control. That's something a lot of people struggle with, coming to the realization that in life, more often than not, the truth is the only real control you have is how you respond to a situation. I know you guys have heard me say something like 10% of your life is what actually happens to you, and 90% of your life is how you react to it.
Mm.
That's the only real control we have is our response, and that's where the labels come from. Our response to situations.
Yeah. Yeah.
well, guys, for those of you who are watching, whether you're watching live or watching in the future, I just want to encourage you that any labels that you may be feeling right now, they really don't matter. I know they matter. And they really feel like they matter, especially if you're in situations like Alex, where you're laying in a hospital bed in a prison and you feel like you're isolated, or if you feel like nobody cares, or if you feel like your physical circumstances are beyond repair, or if you're addicted to drugs or pornography, or addicted to poor relationships. The circumstances don't matter as much as submitting to somebody who sees your value while you're going through them. That's what God works with. He doesn't work with you being perfect. He doesn't work with who you're going to be. He works with who you are. So, I just want to thank Alex for joining us today and for being honest about his situations.
Yes.
And, your testimony is so important, guys. There are aspects of Alex's testimony that he keeps private for good reason. Like, there are things that you just don't tell everybody.
Right.
But, guys, I want to encourage you. The stuff that you're going through, you got to look at it. The bigger the circumstance, the bigger the what's the word when you're receiving something that's tough and sucks, the oppression, adversity. Thank you. The greater the adversity, the greater your testimony is going to be, and the more people it's going to help. Because I promise
And the
you, man,
greater God's grace as well, I'd like to add.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But there are so many people out there that are dealing with what you're going through. If you are 16 and pregnant, there are so many other people that are going through that and that are going to go through that could be encouraged and that could be lifted up by seeing you go through it. And don't take that as a weight on your shoulders. Take that as something that God has set you up to do that's going to be awesome because he trusts you with that. Like Alex was saying, God never gives you anything that you're not prepared for. And he doesn't give you the bad stuff to begin with.
Right.
He lets you navigate things because we are on this earth to create dominion. We're supposed to bring the kingdom, right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to claim authority over all this garbage. And if you're going through it and you're not through it yet, basically that's God saying, I trust you with this because you can.
Specifically,
Right.
I want to clarify that I think the scriptures say that he does not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. And when you
Right.
do go through it, he provides you a way out so you can bear it. So, like, tempted is the key word about what you're going through. So, if you're going through something that is way beyond your capability to be able to handle, like, he has a way out, a way to protect you through those situations. But then there may be some situations you encounter that are tempting that may be difficult, but he knows your level that you're able to handle specifically.
Right. With our last minute here, I'd like to speak to the person listening who may not feel like they're going through anything difficult, but maybe they feel like, hey, my life's actually been really good. I've gotten everything I've ever wanted. My family's taking care of me. I've had a really good life, but I don't really feel like I have a purpose. I don't really feel like I have a clear understanding of what my life should be like that. It doesn't always have to be physical adversity that attacks us. Sometimes it's just a straight up lack in clarity for our identity and purpose. Let me just be the one to remind you that God has a definite purpose for you. God has a clear-cut purpose for you. You are uniquely qualified out of 7 billion people in the world to do exactly what God has destined for your life. And just to say that, I'd like to encourage you also, like to replay what we've talked about here and go back to the Bible and look for your identity and come to God. Talk to him, converse with him, and ask him over and over. Make it a habit to seek after him, and he will reveal. You know, like the word says, knock and the door will be open.
Mm-hmm.
Ask and you will receive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those people are just um, as important here in this whole lesson about identity and labels and stuff. It doesn't always have to be someone who's just struggling with something really hard, 16 and pregnant, in prison, in the hospital. Sometimes, more often than not, it's just in the daily ongoings of our life. A lot of people are living a life out there feeling like they're just floating because they have no real sense of identity. And I would appeal to them and say, God loves you. God loves you so much beyond your ability and capacity to understand that. Get to know him. Talk to him, seek after him, and make it a habit every day. And all the answers you could ever want will be revealed to you.
Yeah. So, do you have any last remaining thoughts, Tim, before we close out?
No, I think that's good.
All right.
Thank you guys for having me on. This has been a real blast.
Thank you for
Thank
being
you,
with
Alex.
us, Alex, today. It was great. So I want to thank you guys for watching today. It's been a lot of fun. We broadcast every week on Mondays, Fridays, and Saturdays at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we will be live again this Monday talking about more things that are going on in our lives. We may actually have a guest for that. We've been thinking about having a person, like a different person besides me and Tim, talk about what they're going through and then help them through what they're going through. So we might have that, we might not, but we will be live this Monday, so we'll definitely want you to be there for that. And if this stream has really blessed you, I would like to encourage you to subscribe to us, because that is how we're going to be able to continue to do this full time down the road. We have a goal of $25,000 per month that we are working towards, and if we can do that, we can hire a full-time staff and be able to increase what we're able to do, increase the video quality. We'll be able to travel to different places and speak at different events and churches, host seminars, and a whole slew of things that we would really like to do to add to the value that Thought Raid already has. So if this has really blessed you, the link to our Patreon is in the description on both YouTube and Facebook. If you click that link, there are different tiers of which you can subscribe with different benefits involved with them as well. So if that interests you, we'd love to have that happen. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching. We always love it when you come and join us, and we will see you again this Monday, 4 p.m. You guys have a good night.